last several weeks, we've been talking about the crucifixion and the resurrection. In chapter 24, where we've been now, we have been looking at pretty much the resurrection, because in chapter 24, there's three pictures of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. The first one being when early on Sunday morning, which would have been a couple of thousand years ago from today, early this morning, there was a group of women who went early to the grave in order to prepare the body for the burial. We talked about the things that were involved with that in the Jewish time. And the second scene that we have is from a couple of weeks ago, when Jesus came upon two of his disciples that were walking along a road to a village called Emmaus. And he catches up with them, and they begin this conversation, and their encounter there with the risen Jesus was life-changing for them. We spent quite a bit of time about that, and I have to tell you that I almost never do this, but I went back home after having preached that sermon. For whatever reason, I checked to see if it was on YouTube, and I got to listening to it, and getting towards the end of the sermon, I started crying my eyes out. My own sermon, I never do that. I'm always too critical of it. But you know what really struck me about that is this. We don't get to see Jesus, do we? You know, it's not like Jesus can come to you and say, "Hey, check out my hands. Look at my feet. See, I'm the Jesus." We don't get that. But what really thrilled me about that was that Jesus opened up the Scriptures, and he showed himself, he revealed himself in the Scriptures. And by the way, folks, we do have the Scriptures. Thank God for that. So we have this wonderful opportunity to learn about Jesus and to know who he is, and just because of the Scriptures that we've given. And now, in this day, this week, we're going to look at the third then appearance, or the third scene about the resurrection, where in the evening of this day, the same day would be this evening, sometime maybe around 4 or 5 o'clock, or maybe a little bit later, then Jesus appears to the disciples in Jerusalem. Well, we'll read it in just a minute. In fact, let's turn our Bibles now to Luke chapter 24. Luke chapter 24, and we'll begin reading from verse 36 through verse 49. This is about Jesus appearing to his disciples. Backing up on that for just a bit, because this is kind of an amazing story here. Remember, he's walking with two disciples. They're going to Emmaus. The village of Emmaus is about 11 kilometers away from Jerusalem. How long does it take to walk 11 kilometers? Anybody have a guess? It's about 7 miles. So if you run a 5-minute mile, you can make it pretty quick. But if you walk a 20-minute mile, you're not going to make it very quick. But the reason I say that is this, just for the logistics of it. They've gotten to the village in Emmaus there. It's about 11 kilometers away from Jerusalem. And they ask Jesus, which is a very, very polite and very cultural thing for them to do, to ask Jesus to stay and have dinner with them. So Jesus agrees to do that. He sits to have dinner with them, and they still don't recognize him yet until Jesus sits down and he breaks the bread. They recognize him. They talk about how their hearts burned within them. And Jesus immediately disappears, just like that. It's not magic, but it's different from what we do today. And then these same two disciples, they decide they've got to get back to Jerusalem, because they've got to get back to Jerusalem and tell those disciples, "Hey, we saw him. We want you to know." And as soon as they get back to those disciples, here's how they're greeted. They're greeted with this saying, "The Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon." So they're telling their experience of having encountered Jesus. Then Cleopas and the other disciple, they tell their experience on the road of having met with Jesus. And so this is what they're talking about when we begin here. As they were talking about these things, what are they talking about? They're talking about the fact that they have seen a dead man who's not dead anymore. Pretty amazing, right? Ever had that conversation lately? You know, I'm amazed. I really am amazed how readily we believe this. It's something that is so counter to our culture, so counter to our experience and to our life, and yet we believe it. Or maybe you don't. I can totally understand people who say, resurrection, you kidding me? Who believes that kind of stuff? Okay, hang with me. We're going to deal with that today, okay? So they're talking about these things, and Jesus himself stood among them and said to them, peace to you. All right, again, excuse me for interrupting while you're reading the scriptures, but they're having a conversation talking about the things that are going on. And just like this, I can't say just like this, but suddenly Jesus appears in their midst. I mean, they're in Jerusalem. The doors are locked. Nobody's going in, nobody's going out. And voila, here's Jesus. And Jesus says to them, peace. Probably the best thing he could say at the moment. Because here's what the Bible says. They were startled and frightened and thought they saw a spirit, or you could say a ghost. And he said to them, why are you troubled? Why do doubts arise in your hearts? See my hands and my feet, that it is I myself? Touch me and see. For a spirit does not have flesh and bones, as you see that I have. And when he had said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. And while they still disbelieved for joy and were marveling, he said to them, have you anything here to eat? They gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and ate it before them. Then he said to them, these are my words that I spoke to you while I was still with you, that everything written about me in the law of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms must be fulfilled. Then he opened their minds to understand the scriptures and said to them, thus it is written that the Christ should suffer and on the third day rise from the dead, and the repentance and forgiveness of sins should be proclaimed in his name to all nations, beginning from Jerusalem. You are witnesses of these things, and behold, I am sending the promise of my Father upon you, but stay in the city until you are clothed with power from on high. That city would be the city of Jerusalem. So, in each of these three scenes that we've seen in chapter 4, including what we've seen here today, the sequence seems to be the same. First of all, there's confusion. I mean, you can understand this, I hope. That when you saw somebody die on a cross and you saw them put into a grave, you saw the stone rolled shut, and now you're looking at him eye to eye, you're going, whoa, something's wrong. There's something a little chaotic in my world when this is happening. Would you agree with me? Or is this something that you're accustomed to? Let me just tell you a story. It's not a nice story, but it illustrates my point. I grew up in Taiwan, down in Taichung. I went to the school of Morrison Academy. My mother was my mother was the girls' dorm mother, so I got to live in the girls' dorm. But being a, how should I say, a normal teenager, somewhat talpy, naughty and not so nice, there was a haunted house just down the road from our school there. And, we used to hang out there. We just causing trouble and so forth. So one evening, we were down there, and on the other side of the wall, there's a pathway going back to a village. The bus stops. A couple of ladies get off the bus, and they begin walking down this path there. And I got down beside the wall, and I go, woo! And I mean, they just go, ah! They started screaming. I heard them for a long time. Now, that's not a very nice story. I shouldn't be telling it with young children in here, I'm sure. Not exactly X-rated, but it's not something that you want your children to be doing or mimicking. However, it makes my point. They were absolutely certain that house was spirit infested, that there were ghosts there. And we we added to that. I don't know if you've ever been caught out in the dark and suddenly frightened. Maybe you didn't think it was a ghost or anything, but the thing is, this is a very real thing. This is a very real issue that they're talking about. And they're in this home, and there comes this apparition, this body comes in. He's a real body, but first thing that we see here is there's this confusion. And then we see in this sequence, in each of them, Jesus usually rebukes them for their confusion. And then after the rebuke, he gives them instruction as to what to do, where they should go, and so forth. And then there's a witness that there's given. So when you look through these three things, you should notice for those things. First, the confusion. So I understand it. When there's a bit of confusion in somebody's life, when they're first introduced to this guy named Jesus, to this God named Jesus, I understand. And then there's also there's a need for the rebuke with regard to our sin, but then there's instruction. And then from that we turn into witness. You see, what I want us to see from these things, and from this chapter especially, is this. There's no evidence whatsoever that there's a plan to perpetrate a false Jesus. There's nothing coordinated, because there's a chaos here. Everybody's gone everywhere doing everything, and nobody knows what the other person is doing, and so there's no coordinated plan for people to decide, let's fake this resurrection. Let's pretend. Let's make it sound like there really was a resurrection, even though he's dead. These scenes, you see, they're counterintuitive to successfully proving a resurrection, because they're going helter-skelter. And we read this story and that story, and Jesus talks to these people and these people. So what we see here is this, and I want you to understand this. Luke is not trying to prove that there is a resurrection. Luke is not trying to prove that there is, in fact, a resurrection. What he's doing is he's simply reporting the facts of those things that he's seen and heard. That's what he's doing. If he was trying to prove the resurrection, it's the fact that he's talking to these people who don't get it, and there's no plan, there's no idea how this, and the disciples, they're hiding in fear, they're scattered. It wouldn't make sense if they're trying to prove that there is a resurrection. But when we see now these counterintuitive activities and these scenes taking place, we can see that it's these things that cause us to believe that they're not trying to prove a resurrection, they're just showing the facts of it. The facts of it. In each of these encounters with Jesus, he's not even recognized. So they're having a real rough time trying to prove the resurrection if every time Jesus shows up, they're going, "Who are you? I don't recognize you." Until Jesus shows himself to them. When Jesus appears to Mary in the dawn encounter, she didn't know who he was. Not recognized by the two disciples traveling home after the crucifixion. Then the 11. When he appears in their midst, these guys should, of all people, recognize him. They should have gone, "Whoa, Jesus! Wow, look at that, you're back." They didn't recognize him. That's the fear. And so Jesus says to them, "Look, let me show you. Here are the marks that are indelibly imprinted on my body." This was a very physical, tactile, real, and terrifying experience for these disciples. The Bible says about them in the verse that we read, verse 37, they're startled and frightened. Not just startled, not just frightened. That word startled is actually the word where we get our word terrified. They were terrified out of their wits. Well, I get it. Especially if you've been scared out of your wits, you know what it's like. And so that's why Jesus has to say to them, "Hey, listen, look look, here's the evidence. It's me. You can see that it's me. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Now, what we've done for the last 18 months, it's not to study a novel. Luke didn't write us a novel. He didn't write us a mystery book. It's not even a biography. It's not even a biography of the life of Jesus, because it's much more than that. He has done an orderly, he has provided an orderly account of the facts as he has researched and recorded them. Let me read those first 4 verses from the very beginning. He says this: "Inasmuch as many have undertaken to compile a narrative of the things that have been accomplished amongst us." Notice this. We have 4 gospels, right? Only 4. 3 of them are called synoptic: Matthew, Mark, and Luke. There's a similarity amongst them. They shared with each other. John is different. He does a lot of the teaching, a lot of the instruction that he gives from Jesus. Only 4. There are many, many more records. These 4 were chosen and set apart by God as having been come together under the influence of the Holy Spirit of God, and they're in our Bible today. But these are not the only records. Here's what Luke says. In light of the fact that there's many people who have undertaken to try and write this narrative of the things that have been accomplished. Verse 2, "Just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word have delivered them to us. So it seemed good to me also, having followed all things closely for some time past, to write an orderly account for you." That's what he's doing. I'm putting it in order. I'm writing this account to you. I've checked out the facts. I'm writing it to you, most excellent Theophilus, that you may have certainty concerning the things that you have been taught. You see, Luke is not trying to answer the question, did it happen? And that might be our question today. Did it happen? That's not what Luke is trying to say. Luke is reporting these facts because they did happen. They did happen according to the people that he talked to, according to the people that he saw, according to the people that he was able to meet with and to interrogate them and to ask them questions. He's finding that these stories are indeed factual. They're indeed true. And so he says, I'm going to provide a more complete accounting of Jesus in his significance. Why? Because Luke, he hopes to encourage active faith, folks. Active faith. Oh yeah, you see, there's lots of people say, yeah, I'm a Christian. What do you mean by that? Is it just a religion? Is it just a practice that you have? Or is your Christian faith what motivates you, what activates you, what drives you? That's what Luke is trying to say. He's saying, I'm writing these facts, I'm putting them in this account here, that through your faith in knowing these facts are true, you will be motivated to live like Jesus and the example he's given to us. So he writes these from personal experience, personal observation, in order to persuade of the events and the stories that happen that they are indeed factual and true. You notice, and a couple weeks ago I talked to you about the fact that we're given names. That's very important. We're told about 2 disciples that are on the road to Emmaus. We're given the name of one of them. His name is Cleopas. We're told that Cleopas then goes from there and he heads on out back to Jerusalem with the other disciple there. Why are we given these names? I mentioned a couple weeks ago that these names are like footnotes. They're like saying, hey, I'm going to quote this guy, and here's what he said. If you don't believe me, go ask, and there's the name, Cleopas. That's what we do in research papers. That's what I often do in my sermons when I have a quote. I put the name down so that we can, if you don't believe me, you can go look it up and find out. This is what Luke is doing. It's these names. Because of the names, these people are given to us as witnesses, eyewitnesses of these events. Then also throughout his research and throughout the book of Luke, you notice what else we've seen? Have you noticed how many times they're sitting down to eat? Where do you think we get this eating that we do in fellowship all the time? After church every week, what do? Yeah? Whenever we have fellowship together, what do? We eat. Eating is so much a part of what we do. Why? It's good for us, folks. You see, in Jesus' time, there was no fast food. There was no McDonald's or noodle stand or whatever where you can pop in, get whatever you want, and head out on your way there. If you wanted to eat, it was a major time-consuming effort. You actually had to sit down at a table. Oftentimes, you might have to wait for the lunch or the dinner to be made. They got to go out, and like in the story of Abraham, when the angel comes, he tells his wife, go kill the fatted calf. I mean, can you imagine how long that takes? She goes out, catches that thing. She's got to kill it, drain it with the blood, cut it up, butcher it up, slap some meat on the grill, and finally bring it out there. I mean, it's a very long endeavor. You don't just pop over to somebody's house and they throw the food on the table because it's already been prepared, and you eat. In a couple hours, you're on your way. When you're sitting down at table with somebody, this is a major, major event. It's time-consuming, but you know what happens? That's where conversation takes place. That's where sharing takes place. That's where this communication and this fellowship takes place. And as we come to the end of this book, what do we see Jesus doing? He sat down with the two disciples on the Emmaus road. Then when he appears to these disciples in Jerusalem again, he sits down with them. He says, what do you have to eat? I love that. I love that. Jesus comes and visits the house and he says, hey, what do you have to eat? I think that's so cool. The reason it's cool is because it is so very ordinary. It is so very 普通, average. It's just it's such a part of our lives, the eating. Jesus doesn't come to them and say, hey, I know, guys, I died on the cross and I'm alive, and you're probably wondering what's going on. Let me show you something cool. Huh? He could have. This week I was also reading several articles about people who don't believe the resurrection, don't believe the scriptures, and they were mocking and making fun of some of the things that I believe about the Bible and so forth. But the thing is, if Jesus is trying to prove his resurrection, then it seems to me he could do so in a much more different way than just simply showing up and saying, hey, got anything to eat, guys? He could have showed them some tricks. And in fact, one critic, I'll say it nicely, he said, why doesn't Jesus just show up at the Super Bowl at halftime and do some tricks to show he's God? Then everybody would believe him. No, they wouldn't. No, they wouldn't. Because there were those who even saw Jesus raise others from the dead and they didn't believe him. And Jesus told the story about this rich man who went, and he said, and the story was that he said to Jesus, I wish you would send somebody to tell my brothers. And Jesus said to them, if they won't believe Moses and the prophets, they won't even believe if I raise somebody up from the dead. So Jesus just comes in, he enters into life with them. He begins to eat with them. And then they sit down and they have this time together. They're people together, friends, listeners, curious. He sits down with all these people, just begins to have this interaction with them. Then Luke, he finishes his first volume of research rather abruptly. This is pretty much the end of it. There's a couple verses more. I'm going to add them on to next week when we get into the book of Acts. But you see, this is not simply seeing Jesus in passing. It's not seeing Jesus sitting at a restaurant or grabbing a bite to eat. This is the time they get together and they talk and they interact. Eating like this, it does away with the idea of a ghost. Ghosts don't seem to hang around, do they? They seem to kind of drift right through. The ghost, you tell me about this now if it happens, all right? You've got a ghost at your house and he sits down and says, let's have dinner. If he does, you might want to write a book. If we really want to see arguments, we won't find the arguments for the resurrection in the book of Luke. But we will find them later on, written by a guy named Paul. Paul writes a letter to a church in Corinth. And it's interesting to hear what Paul writes, because Paul was not, he was not contemporary with, he wasn't hanging out with Jesus and their disciples. He came later. But he did have an encounter with Jesus. After he had gone throughout the city of Jerusalem, killing and putting in jail those who were followers of Jesus, he wanted to get rid of them. But he had such a change in life when he encountered Jesus in his life. Let me just read to you this passage in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. I don't have it up on the screen on purpose because I just want to go through it. 1 Corinthians chapter 15. This is Paul writing. Remember, Paul is, he came lately. Johnny come lately. He didn't see Jesus. He hates the Christians, or hated the Christians. He was killing the Christians on the road to, as he was going to kill some more Christians. Then he met with Jesus and had an encounter. He says this, "Now I would remind you, brothers, how of the gospel I preached to you, which you received, in which you stand, and by which you are being saved, if you hold fast to the word I preached to you, unless you believed in vain." Now here's what he says, "For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Jesus Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures." You see, he has to say in accordance with the Scriptures. In accordance with the Scriptures. That he was buried, that he raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, that's Peter, and then to the 12. Then he appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time. Most of them are still alive, though some have fallen asleep. That's important, folks. You know why Peter has this confidence? He has talked to eyewitnesses who have seen Jesus. And he says, over 500 people saw the risen Savior at one time. Now, if we're trying to prove something, that might be what we want to do. But here's what we do. You see, Paul experienced a personal encounter with Jesus Christ. A personal encounter. It was the personal encounter with Jesus Christ before he heard from the eyewitnesses. The reason I say that is this. When it comes to things like doctrine and truth and is Jesus real, did that happen, is the resurrection real, we have a tendency to want to beat people over the head with our arguments and to force them into a corner to make them believe that this is the way it is. We like to beef up our arguments so we can prove to them, I'm right. This resurrection did happen. Let me show you. You'd be an idiot not to believe these facts. But what I find so interesting is this, that time and again, it wasn't the facts that convinced me. It was the person. It was encountering Jesus Christ, the risen Savior. That's what radically changed Paul to become a great leader and a great defender of the faith. And I would suggest to you, if somebody is struggling and you've got doubts with this matter of Christianity, you have doubts with this matter of God, you don't believe there's a God, and you're curious and you're saying, how can I believe in these things? I just want to put it to you like this. Ask. Ask. God, if you're real, will you show me? I'd like to know. That was my personal experience. I grew up, I've told you the story many times, grew up in a missionary home here in Taiwan. My dad was a missionary in Taiwan, passed away here, and my mom raised us here, went to Morrison Academy. I had Bible all day long. First thing when I woke up in the morning, we had a Bible devotion. First thing at breakfast. First period of every class, of every day of school was a Bible class. When we got done, when we got back to the dormitory, we'd always have devotions, have to memorize verses. Bible, 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 Bible. Besides the fact that I was raised in a preacher's family, okay? So, but I've noticed this. It's not so much what we know as it is our encounter with Jesus Christ. And I remember very clearly laying in bed in college, first year, I don't remember now, it's too long ago. But I just remember saying this, Lord, I know I've been taught that you're supposed to be real. And God, if you're real, I'd like you to show me. I'd like you to show me. And at that time, I had a real problem with my mouth. I still have a problem with my mouth. But the thing is, my roommate said, Homer, I can't hardly even talk to you. You can't say a single sentence without swearing or cursing. He says, it's disgusting. I'm tired of listening to you. He was right. But man, I couldn't stop. Every other word out of my mouth was a horrible curse word because it's very hard to control the tongue. If you'll be honest, you'd all raise your hand, but that's okay. We just say things like this. I remember praying that morning in my bed saying, God, if you're real, then I would like you to take this cursing away from me. So I got up this morning. It was Sunday morning, supposed to go to church, but I wasn't in church. I was working in the cafeteria. Working in the cafeteria with the slop and the food, it's being slopped all around, and I was the dishwasher. I had to scrape the dishes and throw them in the dishwasher. That's why the foul mouth, okay? Got done, went back to my room, and well into the afternoon, it suddenly occurred to me. Not a single curse word came out of my mouth. And I can say, by the grace of God, from that day till this, I've never had a problem with it. I'm not saying I've never cursed or sworn, but I'm simply saying God's taken it under control. It's away. I've even smacked my thumb with a hammer and not cursed. To me, it was obvious evidence of the hand of God. It was an encounter that I needed to see. But you see, belief is not simply assent. It's asking God, are you real? Are you who you say you are? Just asking him, show yourself to me. But then when he does, then it's responding. You see, to believe is not simply saying, I believe. To believe is actually to act upon it. Tim Keller has a quote that I'd like to share with you. That quote says this, you can only reason to the place of probability, but then you have to commit to get to the place of certainty. You can only reason so far. Let me give you an example. Since I like playing the game of soccer, and I had the opportunity to coach the game. When you're coaching the game, you take different players and you put them on your team and place them on your team. You don't always know who the best player is. It's amazing how the player you think isn't going to amount to much blossoms and shines. So when you're choosing your team, you use the best of your ability in reasoning and choosing the right people to be on your team. But at some point, then you've got to step out and you've got to say, hey, you're on this team and you're playing. At some point, you have to make that commitment. It's the same when it comes to hiring somebody for your office. You want the best employee. There's all kinds of libraries of books out there telling you how to hire the right person. And you can, with the best of reasoning and the best of thinking and go to great lengths to hire the right person. But you have got to decide that you're going to give them a contract and they're coming on board. So you've got to make that commitment. The same is true in our faith, folks. You can say you can say everything about what you believe, but there comes a point where you have to say, I believe and I commit. It's a belief that's rational. It's a belief that's reasonable. It's always, Keller goes on to say, it's always a combination of both the rational and the personal, both the intellectual and the visceral, that deep inward feeling. We do the best we can. We think. We work things out. But there comes a time when we have to act to go about doing it. We take a step of faith based upon rational thought and reasoning. Isn't that right? It's not a blind faith. It's not a stupid faith. It's not walking, because I promise you this, folks. If I come to the edge of a cliff and I jump, I'm not going to fly. I can fly in my dreams. It's exhilarating. I love to fly in my, do you? I've gotten it down, man. I can levitate in my dreams. But every single time I wake up, I'm lying flat on my bed, no levitation. That's the facts. But you see, when it comes to this, we then have to understand that when I take this leap of faith into the hands of God, it's not just a leap into nothing. It's thought out. It's considered. It's rational. It's reasonable to know that that God who wrote this word is there and he'll catch me. Not only will he catch me, but if I put my hand out, he'll hold my hand on the way in. Those of you who have children, you know what I'm talking about, especially if you've gone to a swimming pool. You've gone to the swimming pool and you go, my oldest son, Anthony. You know, I mean, we'd go to the swimming pool and I'd say, he's on the edge of the pool and I'd get as far away as I can. I go, Anthony, jump, man, jump. Just jump, I'll catch you. He'll look at me and you know what? He jumps. He jumps. Why would he jump? Do you think he'd jump for you? If he doesn't know you, I'm his dad. He knows me. We've had some talks back and forth. He is absolutely confident that when he jumps, I'll catch. That's the way it is with our Heavenly Father. I'm not just jumping to just jump. We have people who call this Christian faith a leap of faith. I'm not questioning the leap. I'm just questioning the people who think that there's no rationality behind it. I like jumping from heights. I like jumping from high waterfalls and high bridges. When I was in California a couple years ago, my son Charles hung a rope. We went way up in the mountains and hung a rope over this bridge across the river there. Ooh, that water was cold. That water was cold. And then we took that rope and we got up way up on this cliff and we run with that rope and we jump way out there and that rope goes, woo, swings way down there. And then you let go and splash. But I wouldn't have just walked up there and done it to any rope. Not without having checked out to that river and not having known that it was my son who hung it there. You see what I'm saying, folks? Some people say, well, that's stupid to put your trust in something like that. Not if you do your research and you check out the facts. It's not. And that's what this Bible is for. That's what Luke is for. That's what he's trying to do. He's given this account. So why do people believe this story about Jesus? It amazes me all the time. Why do you believe Jesus? Why do you believe that this man who walked on this earth, he calls himself God? Are you kidding me? Somebody comes up to you today and he says, hey, glad to meet you. My name is Jesus the Christ, the Messiah. I'm God. I much prefer having a Bible to look at. I'd have a hard time with that. But you see this fantastic account of a man born to a virgin who claims to be God in the flesh, who came to save humanity from our sin. I believe that. I believe that. Why? This whole story we've been reading the last 18 months, it's filled with these fantastically unbelievable accounts of a guy who walks on water, who stands up in the middle of a storm and he calms a storm, who feeds 5,000 people from 2 fish and 5 loaves, who literally walks up to a funeral and touches the dead body and the guy gets up. Are you kidding me? In what book that you read today would you ever think of believing that stuff? If you saw it on the movie or the television, or even saw it on the news, would you believe it? And yet for the last 18 months, what have we been doing? Time and again. But when this story is placed in the big story of reality, it makes rational sense. Let me just go quickly through this. I'm almost done, folks. So when looking over this, I asked myself the question, Dave, why do you believe? Why do you believe? You see, the thing is this, and it's true of all of us. I live in a real world. Yeah? I live in a world that is a mess. I have hopes and aspirations and desires. Many of you got a letter from my wife this past week. It's been a pretty rough week. I live in a real world, folks. Disease is real. Sickness happens. It kills. People die. Happens all the time in my world. So why do I believe this stuff? Because when I look at it, I can see the reality of it. You see, somehow we've gotten in our idea, this idea in our mind, that those things that are spiritual are not real because we can't touch and feel it, right? We can't actually see it necessarily. It's not material. Because it's spiritual, we say, I can't really be real, but I put my faith in it. That's false. Because I want to promise you something. The real, the spiritual was equally as real to Jesus as the physical. Equally as real to Jesus as the physical. And for us, it needs to be the same. You see, I believe in God. The reason I believe in God is just simply because, I look around me and I'm going, how did this come about? Maybe your life is much more simple than mine. And maybe I'm just making life too complex and chaotic. I don't know. But there's just a whole lot in this world I don't get. I really don't get it. And there's a whole lot of people who are really smart. But here's what I found out. Really smart people, they're really smart in this part. Okay? And other really smart people, they're really smart with this part. But I don't know anybody who knows everything about everything. And there's just too much. Besides that, it's hard for me to get myself around the reasonable, rational thought that we came from nothing. That all that we see here, the complexities of each individual in just this room, do you realize, can you think about the DNA that's come together to form you and to make you into who you are, and all the intricacies of that DNA that's reflected in you, your responses, your body, your appearances, your likes, your dislikes, your expressions, all of that comes together in your DNA. How did that come together? Well, mom and dad. Yeah, but what about theirs? And how did it come together like it did today to where you can be a healthy and a normal individual? And how does that work out over and over and over and over again, down through generations, through hundreds of years, thousands of years, down to today, where it's kept going? And it all happened, folks, by a bomb, or not a bomb, a bang. A bang. Maybe two atoms coming together, wherever those atoms came from. To me, it's an incredible leap of faith to jump off into that and say, yeah, that's how it happened. For me, it makes much more sense to believe that there is a rational God, reasonable God, who has no beginning, he has no end. And in his great wisdom and understanding, he created these things to be, and he's given it continuity. Continuity is so important. Why do we depend on things today? Because there's a continuity to life. There's a cycle to it. Things happen. Things happen after one another. Why does that happen like that? It can't be the result of chance. You don't get continuity out of chance. Continuity deteriorates. I say all that to say this, folks. People say, well, what a leap of faith that you should believe in God. I'm sorry. I think it's far more a leap of faith to say that I don't believe there's any God. That there isn't any wisdom, there isn't any mind, there isn't any kind of person or thought that put this all together. And that it just, here we are. Really? I believe also in God because I believe God reveals himself to us. A couple weeks ago, we discussed the question, what if there was no Jesus? What if there was no Jesus? How would we know about God if God had not come to us? I believe that God came to us. He reveals himself to us. He does so for the purpose, he says, that you might know the truth. Not only that, I believe in that God spoke to us in his word. What if we had no Bible today? What if we had to depend on the stories passed down? What if we had to depend on YouTube? That YouTube is telling us the story of reality. You know how unstable YouTube is? It's just ones and zeros. That's all it is. It can go in no time. I appreciate, and I'm holding up a real physical written Bible. It's not ones and zeros like in there, okay? The reason I'm doing that is because I find that the written word is so very important today. The printed word is so important. Why? It's a lot harder to get rid of. You actually have to burn this. You don't have to burn this. You can just erase it. And it's so comforting to know. I believe that God gave us his word, and he's communicated to us his word so that we can know him. And folks, there's no better way to know God than to know his word. No better way. Why do I believe? I believe God reveals himself to us. He's written this letter to us. It's an amazing book. And I also believe because of personal things, personal encounters, spiritual events, times in which I've sensed in a very real way, physical way even, the presence of God. And it's at times been overwhelming. You say, well, I've not experienced that. It's not in the experience. Let me go back and step back. It's an understanding our story, the reality of the story, the reality of the spirituality, of the spiritualness of our story. It's being able to then say, and the basis of this reality, the reasonable of it, to be able to step out and make that commitment, saying, I believe, I'm going to jump. It's stepping out by faith to make this commitment. So, Luke is really abrupt with his ending here. But this earthly story that we've been given, this is told over and over again. It starts all the way back in Genesis, goes all the way through to the end of the Bible. Very quickly, let me just say, there's 5 elements to this story. There's the element of God. There's the element of humans, us. Then there's Jesus, who is God-man. Then there's the cross. Then there's the resurrection. This story can be boiled down to one sentence. Let me read that sentence to you. God, the creator of the universe, in order to rescue humans from punishment for their rebellion, he came to earth and took on humanity in Jesus, the Savior, to die on a cross and rise from the dead, so that in the final resurrection, those who receive his mercy will enjoy a wonderful friendship with their sovereign Lord in the perfect world that our hearts have always yearned for. This is the reality of the good news that Luke had recorded, that God has preserved for us for today so that you and I can be a part of it, that you might know the truth. What's your story? What's your story? It's a story, the story that we've read, it's the best story there ever is. That Jesus, God, came to us to wrap us in his arms. He took upon himself our sin. He bore the punishment of God for my sin. I'm free today. No one can give me the freedom from sin that Jesus can. No one. He's our only hope. that you might know the truth. This is a true story. It's the reality. Let's pray. Father in heaven, I'm so glad that in your providence, you designed that a man like Luke, of his intelligence and his ability, that he would be able to do the research and ask the question, and find the people, and make the record, and put it in an account, an orderly account. And that account that you've preserved and you've kept it down to this day and to this time, that we can have it and hold it in our hands. We can read it and know the truth. You, Lord, have brought it down to where we've been able to study now for these last many months. But the reality is, Lord, if it's going to be real in our life, we have to take it and commit ourselves to your story. That you become a part of us, we become a part of you. And we walk together like you walk together with your disciples on the road, like you sat together with your disciples at the table. May we also be in continual and constant fellowship with you, because you are real. Amen.